Hi everyone, in this lesson we're going to look at percentage increase and decrease using a calculator. So let's look at our first example. We've got a percentage increase. Increase £160 by 3.5%. And because we're increasing it by 3.5%, what we've done is we've taken our 100% and we've added on 3.5%. This gives us a final value of 103.5%. And this percentage is going to act as our multiplier to give us our final value. So what we can do in our calculator is we can take our £160 and we can multiply it by 103.5%. And this calculation gives us 103.5% of my £160, which is going to be my final answer. Now my calculator has a percentage button. In order to find that, I go to Catalog, I go to Probability, and then I click on this percentage button. And I want to type in 103.5%. In order to tell my calculator to do 103.5% of 160, I multiply them together like this. And that gives me this answer of 165.60. I put in that extra zero because it's money. Now that's one way to do the calculation in your calculator. The other way is to turn this 103.5% into a decimal multiplier. And to do that, we divide by 100. So take your 103.5%, divide it by 100 to turn it into this decimal multiplier. That's 1.035. So this is equal to 1.035. And this is what we call a decimal multiplier. And this particular decimal multiplier is equivalent to a 3.5% increase. So what we can do is we can take our £160 and we can multiply it by 1.035. If you notice, both these calculations will give us the same answer. We can multiply it by 103.5% if we've got the percentage button. And if we don't, we can just turn it into a decimal and multiply by this. So I'll go to my calculator, 160 multiplied by 1.035, click the execute button in the bottom right, change the format to a decimal, and it gives me the same answer of 165.60. The other option is a percentage decrease. So it says decrease 490 kilograms by 54.1%. So we always start with 100%. That's going to be equal to our 490 kilograms, and we've lost 54.1%. So let's type that into our calculator and see what we get. We'll do 100, subtract 54.1, and that gives me an answer of 45.9%. So that's the amount that I have left over. I want to turn that into a decimal multiplier. So I'll take my answer already stored in my calculator and divide it by 100. And that gives me this decimal multiplier of 0.459. And if I multiply something by this, it's equivalent to finding 45.9%, or we could also think of it as being equivalent to a 54.1% decrease. Because if we decrease something by 54.1%, we're left with 45.9%. So the calculation I want to do is take my 490 kilograms and decrease it by 54%, which is to say we want to find 45.9%. And I'll type this in my calculator. So 490 multiplied by 0.459. That gives me this answer, which is 224.91. And always make sure to put in your units. The answer is kilograms in this case. So that's my final answer, 224.91 kilograms. Pause the video and give these two questions a go. Feel free to use the percentage button if you have it on your calculator, or if you don't, just turn it into that decimal multiplier. Okay, let's look at both of these. So increase £240 by 12.4%. Let's start by working out that decimal multiplier. We always start with 100%. It's an increase, so we're going to be adding 12.4%, and that's going to give us 112.4%. To get my decimal multiplier, I divide that by 100, which gives me 1.124. I can then take my £240 and increase it by 12.4% by multiplying by this decimal. And that's what I type in my calculator. So 240 multiplied by 1.124. Of course, you could also type 112.4% if you want to, but I'm going to go for the decimal multiplier in this case. And then that gives me a decimal of £269 and 76 pence. In the second one, it says decrease 980 kilograms by 98.5%. Let's get our decimal multiplier, start with 100%, subtract 98.5%, and let your calculator do the heavy lifting there. Do 100, take away 98.5, and turn that into a decimal. It comes out at 1.5%. So that's what I have left over. To turn that into a decimal, divide by 100, so that's 0.015. And it's really important that we put in our symbols because 1.5% is equivalent to 0.015. But if I don't have that symbol and I just have 1.5 and 0.015, these two things are very much not equivalent. They are if I've got the symbol, but not if I don't. So what this means is if I decrease 980 kilograms by 98.5%, I've got only 1.5% left over. This decimal is what gets me 1.5% of the 980. I take my 980 kilograms and I multiply it by 0.015. So type that in. And that gives me 14.7 kilograms. Our next example is a successive percentage change, which means there's more than one percentage change in the question. A laptop costs £425. It is increased by 20% and then decreased by 20%. How much is it worth now? Let's look at our increased by 20% multiplier. So to work out that multiplier, we would start with 100%. We would add on 20%, which gives us 120%. And we'd turn that into a decimal by dividing by 100, which is 1.2. So that is a 20% increase multiplier. We'll then look at a decrease by 20% multiplier. So that would involve starting with 100%, subtracting 20%, leaving us with 80% left over. And as a multiplier, that is 0.8. So that is a 20% decrease. Two things have happened to this laptop. It's been increased and then decreased. And we want to work out how much it's worth now. So we'll say the new price is equal to the original price. So that's the £425 multiplied by 1.2. So that's the 20% increase. And we could work out what that is and then take that value and go on with our calculation. But I can just do this in one big calculation. So it's actually this entire thing I'll type in my calculator. So 425 increased by 20%, that's your 1.2. Decreased by 20%, that's your 0.8. And if you multiply these two numbers together, they don't equal 1. Therefore, my number isn't going to be the same. Of course, you might think that if we've increased by 20% and then decreased by 20%, we'd get back to the same answer. But actually, that's not the case. And let me just show you why that is. If I actually get rid of the 425 for now, and if I do a 20% increase followed by a 20% decrease, notice that this gives me 0.96. So it's actually less than 1, which means it's a decrease overall. So let's go back to what we were actually doing there. We do our 425 multiplied by 1.2 multiplied by 0.8, and that gives me £408. Pause the video and give this question a go. Alex earns £600 each week. His pay is increased by 17% when he gets a promotion, but then decreases by 42% when he reduces his hours. What is his new weekly pay? So let's look at the multiplier for an increase of 17%. Now, some of you might be able to go straight to your answer for this, and that's absolutely fine. If not, start with your 100%, add on your 17% to give you 117%. Notice I'm writing in my symbols correctly. Divide that by 100 to turn it into a decimal, so 1.17. Then we'll look at our decrease of 42%, and that's starting with 100%, subtracting 42% to give you 58%, which is equal to 0.58 as a decimal. To work out his new weekly pay, we're going to take his pay originally, increase it by 17%, and then decrease it by 42% like this. So we'll type in 600 multiplied by 1.17 multiplied by 0.58, which gives you £407.16 per week. So our next example involves interpreting the multiplier after we've worked it out. A new car loses 20% of its value the moment it leaves the showroom and a further 15% during its first year. What is the overall percentage change in the value of the car? We're going to let the value of the car be equal to x. And we don't actually need to work out what x is. We don't need to know the value of the car, but it might just be helpful for us to see how we would do that in future calculations. The car loses 20% of its value. So let's look at that multiplier first. So a 20% loss, well, we start with 100%, subtract our 20%, that gives us 80%, and that's equal to 0.8 as a multiplier. So that's my 20% loss. And then it loses a further 15%, so 15% loss. Again, that's 100%. We start with 100% every time. Take away the 15% to give us 85%, which is equal to a 0.85 multiplier. And that is my 15% loss. And the question's asked us, what's the overall percentage change in the value of the car? Now, it's obviously going to be a loss, but how much? And what we'd normally do is we'd take the value of our car, which we've said is x, we would multiply that by 0.8, and then we would multiply it by 0.85. In other words, we'd decrease it by 20%, then we'd decrease it by 15%. Now, we don't actually know what the value of the car is, and that's okay. If we multiply these two numbers together, that's going to give us an overall multiplier, which tells us our overall percentage change. We can say this calculation is equal to x, that's the value of the car, multiplied by, and in my calculator, I'll multiply these two together. So 0.8 multiplied by 0.85, turn that into a decimal, and it gives me this decimal, 0.68. So as you can see, if I lose 20% and then lose 15%, that's equivalent to this multiplier. Let's come up here and interpret this multiplier. It's a 0.68 multiplier. And what we'll do is we'll turn this into a percentage. So if we multiply it by 100, that will give us 68%. So let's think about what that means in the context of our question. If we've lost 20% and we've lost 15%, that's equivalent to multiplying by 0.68, and it's equivalent to having 68% left over. It doesn't mean we've lost 68%, it means we have 68% after the loss. In order to work out the value of our loss, we take 100% and we take away the 68%. In other words, we're trying to work out what I would have to lose from 100 to get down to 68. Do that in my calculator, 100 subtract 68. I'm sure I didn't need my calculator for that, which is 32%. Now, what that means is I've lost 32% to get me down to 68%. What is the overall percentage change in the value of the car? The answer to that is a 32% decrease. How did we get that? Well, we did our 20% decrease, our 15% decrease. We said that was equivalent to a multiplier of 0.68, which is 68%. That means that 68% is what remains. And we just wanted to work out what we lost from 100 to get down to this. We lost 32%. It's a 32% decrease. Give this question a go and then we'll run through it together. The net worth of a businessman increases by 35% over a year. The following year, it decreases by 45%. What's the overall percentage change in his net worth? Let's look at the 35% increase and we'll work out the multiplier for that. So we start with 100%. We've gained 35%. That gives us 135%, which is equal to a 1.35 multiplier. It then decreases, so 45% decrease. Start with your 100%, subtract 45%. That gives you 55%, which is equal to a 0.55 multiplier. So those are the two multipliers I need. The overall percentage change, let's look at the overall change, is going to be equal to these multipliers multiplied together. And we don't know if the overall change is an increase or a decrease at this stage. So that's the 35% increase. That's the 45% decrease. Multiply these two together. And it gives you this value here, which is 0.7425. So the first thing to say is that this is a decrease because it's less than 1. If you multiplied something by this, the value would go down, so it's a decrease. Let's interpret what this multiplier means. And to do that, we're going to turn it into a percentage. So 0.7425 is equal to 74.25%. Now, again, really important that we don't say that this is the decrease. It isn't. It's what's remaining after the decrease. We want to know how much we lost from 100 to get down to this. So take 100%, take away the 74.25%. Do that on your calculator. 100 subtract 74.25. And that gives you 25.75%. Question was, what's the overall percentage change in his net worth? We're going to say a 25.75% decrease. And it's really important we put in that word so that we know it went down or up. In this example, we're going to look at finding the percentage change. Sam purchased a camera for £120. 3 years later, he estimates its worth is £85. What is the percentage change in its value? The first thing to say is that it's clearly been a decrease. So let's write that now and keep that in mind for later. And throughout the lesson, we've not actually written down a formula at any point, but we've been using it. So let's write down a formula for a percentage increase and decrease questions, and it will be familiar to you. And it's this: the original value multiplied by the multiplier is equal to the final value. And this equation makes a whole lot of sense. Imagine you had £5 and someone came along and doubled it. The multiplier would be 2. Your final value would be £10. The reason this equation is useful is we might have an unknown value at any point in the equation. So for example, let's say we didn't know the multiplier was 2, but we knew the original value and the final value. We would know that the multiplier is 2, and we could use it to figure that out. Similarly, let's say we didn't have the final value, but we did have the multiplier and it was 1.5. That would allow us to find the final value. And likewise, if we had the multiplier and we had the final value, but we didn't have the original value, we would be able to use the numbers to work it out. I just wanted to explain why we're using this. Let's look at our question and see what the original value and the final value are. Sam purchased the camera for £120, so that's the original value. 3 years later, he estimates its worth is £85, so that's the final value. And as you can see in this case, we actually want to find what the multiplier is. What I can do is I can rearrange this equation. In order to get the multiplier, I'm going to divide both sides by 120. So I can say the multiplier is equal to £85 divided by £120. Go into my calculator and I'll type that in, 85 divided by 120, which gives me 17 over 24. As a decimal, that's 0.708 with the digit 3 recurring. Let's go ahead and turn that into a percentage. So we'll multiply it by 100. And that gives us this value of 70.83 recurring percent. Now, to put this into the context of the question, we took our £120, we multiplied it by 70.83%, and that gave us our £85. And we're going to use this value to work out the percentage change. Well, remember, we always start at 100 and we went down to 70.83. So we want to know what number have I lost from 100 to go down to 70.83. So we'll take 100%, we'll subtract 70.83%, and I'm going to use the fact that this is stored in my calculator. So I'll take 100 and I'll take away my answer. My answer button's up here. Remember, that's stored as the 70.83 recurring. Click execute and turn that into a decimal. It gives me an answer of 29.16 recurring percent. What's the percentage change in its value? Well, it went from 120 to 85. We've already said that's a decrease. Our answer is a 29.16% decrease, and it's really important that we write that answer in full. So what is the percentage change in its value? The answer is a 29.16 recurring percent decrease. Pause the video and give this question a go, and then we'll have a look at it together. Alice purchased a painting for £50 in 1985. She had it evaluated in 2005 and it was worth £3,000. So it's obviously went up. Just to make a note, we're going to be dealing with a percentage increase. What is the percentage change in value? Let's start with writing out our equation. So it's the original value multiplied by our decimal multiplier, and that's going to be equal to our final value. And we'll substitute in the values from our question. So Alice purchased painting for £50. So that's the original value. The multiplier is what we want to find in this question. So I'll leave that as an unknown. And that's equal to the final value, which is the £3,000. I'm going to divide both sides by 50 to find my multiplier. That's 3,000 divided by 50, which I'll do in my calculator. So 3,000 divided by 50, which gives me 60. So the multiplier is 60. Now that's quite a large multiplier. That is our decimal multiplier. To turn it into a percentage, I actually multiply it by 100, which takes me to 6,000%. What that means is the camera was £50 and it's been multiplied by 6,000%. And that's given us this final value of 3,000. And if we imagine that the camera started at 100% and it's now went up to 6,000%, we want to know what percentage it's gained. And to work out what that is, we'll do 6,000 subtract 100%. And that gives us this answer of 5,900% increase. So that should have been your answer, a 5,900% increase. The last type of example we're going to look at is where we need to find a missing percentage change. During a property market crash, the value of a £300,000 house decreases by X%. That's what we want to find. The following year, the market recovers and the house value increases by 15.5%. The house is now worth £280,000. Find the value of X, give your answer to 2 decimal places. Okay. Let's start by writing out our equation. It's going to help structure our thinking. The original value multiplied by the multiplier is equal to the final value. And then what we want to do is put in what we have. Do we have the original value? Well, it says it was originally £300,000, so we do. And then we might think, well, do we have a multiplier? And in a sense, we do. We have an unknown multiplier, which we want to find, and we have a known multiplier. And we would be multiplying these decimal multipliers together to get our overall multiplier. So what we'll do is we'll actually leave that as an unknown for now. And we know the final value is £280,000. Now what we can do is we can actually work out the multiplier. This is going to be the overall multiplier, in other words, the combination of the X% decrease and the 15.5% increase. So we'll say the multiplier is equal to the 280,000 divided by the 300,000. So that gives us a value. We'll go to our calculator and type in 280,000 divided by 300,000. And it gives us this answer here, 0.93 recurring. That's our multiplier. Now what we also know is that there was an X% decrease and a 15.5% increase. What I'm going to say is let Y be equal to the unknown multiplier. And the reason I've called it Y and not X is because this X% decrease is not equal to the actual multiplier. We need to work out the multiplier first and then figure out what the decrease is. Our overall multiplier is going to be equal to the unknown multiplier multiplied by the one that we do know, which is the 15.5% increase, which is a 1.155 multiplier. So our unknown multiplier multiplied by the 1.155 gives us our overall multiplier. And we know our overall multiplier is 0.93 recurring. So 0.93 recurring is equal to our unknown multiplier multiplied by our known multiplier. We can rearrange this equation for Y. We can say that Y is equal to 0.93 recurring, which we have in our calculator already, divided by 1.155. And I'll go ahead and I'll do that on my calculator. Now it's already stored as the answer, so all I have to do is hit the answer button, and I don't even have to hit the answer button actually. I then hit divide, and I put in my 1.155. Hit execute, and see what this gives me. It gives me this decimal, 0.80. So this is my multiplier, but it's not the percentage decrease. I want to turn this into a percentage. So what I'll do is I'll multiply it by 100. And what it tells me is that this is equal to 80.8080, and that keeps going, percent. To go back to the context of our question, we had this house which cost £300,000. And two things happened. It was multiplied by our multiplier y, which we said was an 80.80 repeating percentage. Then it was multiplied by 115%, which give us our 280,000 pounds. We can see that that is a 15% increase. And we want to know, what is the decrease here? And remember, that is always relative to 100%. So we'll do 100%, subtract what we've got here, the 80.8080. And that's going to tell us what we've lost from 100% to get down to the 80.80%. So we'll do 100. And all we have to do is take away our answer button. It's already stored. Click execute and turn it into a decimal. And it gives us this answer of 19.19 recurring percent. In other words, we've lost this value from 100% to get our 80.80 recurring. During a property market crash, the value of a £300,000 house decreases by X%. X is equal to 19.191919. Checking our answer, it says give your answer to 2 decimal places. So we want to draw a line after our second decimal place. This digit is a 1, so it tells us we're going to stay. X is equal to 19.19 to 2 decimal places. Pause the video and give this question a go, and then we'll run through it together. A bank share price starts the day at 200 pence. In the morning, the share price increases by X% and then decreases by 0.8% in the afternoon. The shares close the day worth 202 pence. Find the value of X. Give your answer to 2 decimal places. Let's start by writing out our formula. The original value multiplied by the multiplier is equal to the final value. We know the original value is 200 pence. We want to work out the overall multiplier, which is composed of 2 separate multipliers. That's equal to the final value, which is the £202. The multiplier is equal to 202 divided by 200, and it gives you 1.01. So that's the overall multiplier. And we know that this multiplier is composed of 2 separate multipliers. It's the increase of X%, and then it's the decrease of 0.8%. Let's say let y be equal to the unknown multiplier. The decrease of 0.8% is worth looking at. So if we start with 100% and we've lost 0.8%, that is equal to 100 subtract 0.8, which is equal to 99.2%, which as a multiplier is 0.992. And what we've got is the overall multiplier of 1.01 is equal to y, which is our unknown multiplier, multiplied by that 0.8% decrease, which is our 0.992. What we then need to do is to solve this for y. So we divide 1.01 by the 0.992 and type that into our calculator. It gives us quite a nasty decimal. It's 1.018145161. I'm just going to clear the screen and we'll interpret that in a second. We find that our unknown multiplier was this, and we want to turn that decimal into a percentage by multiplying by 100, and it gives us this. If we imagine what this means in the context of our question, we had our 200 pence. We multiplied it by the 101.8145161%, and then we decreased it by 0.8%, which was equivalent to multiplying by 99.2%. This was a decrease of 0.8%, and we want to figure out what that is as an increase. So we'll take 100 from this. So just writing out what that would look like. Take our unknown multiplier, take away the 100% to see what the increase is. And for me, that's already stored in my calculator. So I just need to multiply by 100 to turn it into 101 instead of 1.01. Then take away my 100. And that gives me 1.814516129%. We got to round that to 2 decimal places. It's 1.81% to 2 decimal places. And that's your final answer. If you're using our lesson booklets, you can now complete exercises 1 and 2. Thank you for watching this video.